All right, well, thank you everybody for joining. This is the eighth session of the Digital Marketing Workshop Series in partnership with Park to Park, Talented 10th, and also New York City Small Business Services. Can't believe we're here, but we wanted to, as Nicole just said, bring it all home. We have another great topic for you today. Today we'll be talking about expanding your brand footprint, growth hacking, and micro influencer alignment. And what you'll notice as we get into the content is that a lot of the concepts and frameworks as part of this discussion really tap into everything we've talked about to this point. So it kind of really is a culmination of a lot of the information that we've discussed and different strategies and so forth. Um, so with that said, let's get kicked off. So to start out, what is growth hacking? So growth hacking is the process of experimenting and aiming to build and maintain your company or your organization or your brand's customer base. And it's really kind of built in kind of three different, I guess, principles or ideas. And that's it, being creative, innovative, and also low cost. So really the growth hacking concept, I guess, to just tie it in again, is the experimentation of aiming to build and maintain your customer base, and then doing it through the lens of innovation, creativity, and low cost. So it's experimenting in these multiple strategies to execute upon that. And then when we get into the techniques, really what we can really think about it when we're talking about growth hacking is focusing in these three swim lanes of awareness, evaluation, and conversion. So with awareness, this is an idea, a concept, and a strategy we've talked about over the course of the sessions, is really to get the interest of the people, your prospective customers, your customer base, new customers, new partners. And within those growth hacking techniques that fall under the awareness are, SEO, SEM, content marketing, amplification, social media activities, and then also getting listed on different websites, all in an effort to build that awareness, to get that exposure. So these are all hacking techniques that can be leveraged to generate awareness. And that's kind of one element of it. The next is really evaluation. And this is another big piece that we try to emphasize as well, is being able to assess and refine, making sure you're taking the time to not just to do, but to evaluate the activities and the strategies that you're taking on, and then seeing where there might be some lessons learned that you can optimize. And how you do that is through optimizing your website. So whether that's making it more succinct, I know we had a few folks in the community on the call mentioned, making sure we're driving folks to our website, seeing how our website, our email listservs can speak to each other. If you do plain content, optimizing your videos. Content is a really big feature now when it comes to marketing and branding. So being able to optimize your videos, finding ways to add your personal brand and tone to it. And then, of course, biggest of them all maybe is A/B testing, being able to test in different groups and segments, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, all part of evaluation. And these are all elements that can be rolled under growth hacking when you're looking to be in that experimental phase. And then lastly, conversion, getting people convinced, and ways you can do that are through the email marketing techniques. Referrals is a big piece as well. So, the ability to, the power of word of mouth, the power of referrals, building relationships and expanding upon them. And then, of course, sign up forms. So having, cohesive, succinct, concise, and user-friendly sign-up forms that give you the information, but also provide customers with insight and information back, giving you the ability to grow your listserv as well. And, to really tie it home, the leading growth hackers are those that leverage a lot of these unconventional tactics under the lens of a lot of these strategies here to acquire customers and outperform their competition while using automation. So, we up until this point, we've talked about a lot of different techniques, a lot of the fundamentals of digital marketing, from social media organically to paid to email marketing to analytics. Really, what growth hacking is once you've kind of done the groundwork and you've developed somewhat of a cadence, it's then getting into that experimental phase where you're now testing and really innovating within these techniques to see what works and what doesn't, to drive direct and sustainable growth. So it's really the step further in experimenting and really testing out different features and really being able to play and understand how you can best grow your brand. So moving on, what are some of the key principles? So we've laid out here 5 major ones that we'd like to focus on before we get into some specific examples, and then techniques that we hope we can share with you and the things you can immediately adopt. So here, some of the principles include evaluating your current marketing initiatives. So once you begin to establish some different initiatives, you've built campaigns on social through email, starting to evaluate those, see what works. Setting smart and achievable goals, goals that are measurable, goals that are achievable, goals that are in the direction of where you deem success is. Planning experiments. So taking the time to plan out and say, hey, this week or this quarter, I'm going to see if these 3 strategies can build my following, and really taking the time and dedication to start testing and really basing it in a hypothesis. So once you've evaluated your initiatives and you kind of understand and you have a hunch that there might be something more here, taking the time to build out an actual experiment around it to see and really evaluate the consistency or the potential of that initiative, and then letting it run. Having the patience and the time to allowing your experiments to take its course. So the patience, the trust, and understanding the value in really trying to experiment with different things and the value it can bring from the lessons that you'll learn. So letting it run, and then also documenting, making sure that with every initiative that you do, with every tactic that you take on, that you're making sure you're cataloging and recording it. So as you do your reviews, as you work with your partners, as you work with your team, you have a basis to evaluate so that your strategies and planning is not only built on strategy but built on insight. So that's something we want to emphasize as well when speaking to the principles of growth hacking. And now let's get into some strategies. As always, we want to make sure that we're not just giving you content, but we're giving you specific examples and strategies and screenshots that you can directly apply. So that's what we're going to get into real quick. Let's lead off with building social links. So we wanted to take the time here to emphasize as one way to, I guess, growth hack is to build social sharing links directly into your content. So if you have content, whether it sits on your website, whether it sits on a campaign within your email, making sure that you're creating it and making it easy for your audience to not only engage with you, but tell their friends. So by including links in creative and tasteful ways that make it seamless and more simplistic to share with their friends, the more likely you are. So this is just an example of how this brand in particular has uniquely laid out ways in which that you can share your link, so that you're able to engage, whether it's through your social channels or whether it's through communicating directly to your friends. This is definitely a growth hack and a way to build that awareness. Moving on is embedded videos. So whether that's through email marketing, through your website, embedding videos can provide an easier way for people to tune in and share your content. So not only engage with and see what you're doing and the content that you offer, but the ability to share it on social. So the more that you embed any live videos or content into your experience for your brand, the more likely you're able to build that engagement, and really provide people with a more seamless way to share. So this is another great growth hack that can drive not only awareness but lead to conversion as well. So we do recommend trying to embed videos as much as you can. Crowdsourcing your team. I think this is one that sometimes can get overlooked because you're constantly thinking more. As a business, you're looking to grow your brand more outwardly, and looking to your customers for insight. But sometimes it's great to actually reflect inward as well. So taking the time to poll your team, your head of sales, your head of analytics, anybody that you might partner with, and say, hey, what are some of the challenges or questions that we're constantly seeing? Questions that are coming up more often, things that we're seeing are becoming a trend and information that people are seeking. And then taking the time to make sure you're able to answer those questions that are popular but are rarely answered. That way, you're not only listening outwardly but inwardly. And that could really be profound because it can give you the opportunity to really find out maybe a key missing element that could lead to a pivot, or it can lead to a new product or a new way of doing business or engaging with your customer base. So taking the time to crowdsource amongst your team, your collective, the folks that you partner with, the folks that you collaborate with, can be a great way to acquire some learnings and then roll out a survey to kind of evaluate that and maybe build strategy, product, or business off of it. So another growth hack is also just crowdsourcing within your amongst your team. Another one is creating a custom audience. I know we talked about social in the specifics of organic and paid, and we talked about building audiences and custom audiences within Facebook in particular. But the growth hack here is really identifying and taking the time to evaluate and understand who your best customers are, and then seeing if there's common denominators. So, this is a platform that we actually use as a company called AdExpresso. It's a very intuitive platform that helps facilitate your paid campaigns with Facebook and give you a lot of data and analytics. So we recommend you check it out and see if it's something that might work for you. And then within that, you have the capacity to really build custom groups. And then through this platform, it makes it very seamless to look at analytics across different groups, customer bases, and things of that nature. So a real growth hack here is creating those custom audiences to allow you and give you the ability to create these common denominators in evaluation. So as you're thinking about campaigns, as you're building them, leveraging a platform like AdExpresso and looking into creating these custom audiences and then finding out what are some key trends that might be insightful is another great growth hack because it gives you the opportunity to get some interesting insight that can lead to big growth for your brand.
Donald, I'm curious. So
Yep.
when you're in that AdExpresso,
Yeah.
wow, that's kind of amazing. So what does it do? Does it look at, so does it pull data from the profiles and says, okay, these are ones that like food, or these are all your people that live in this area? Like, is it pulling it from their profile info, or do you have to enter stuff? Like, how does this actually segment for you?
Yeah, so it ties very seamlessly with your campaign, but I know Matthew in particular has a ton of experience with it, so he could actually probably speak to it better than me.
Yeah.
But I know, Matt, if you wanted to take this one.
This is hugely valuable. I didn't know you could do
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so custom audiences are almost like that deep hack. So if these are growth hacks, that's like the super deep
Yeah.
one, because very similar to what Donnie took you guys through last week, or in the last session rather, with email marketing, where there's so much opportunity where you can create different segments based off of where they've met you or how they've interacted with you. Similarly with social media, AdExpresso and other platforms that are similar with the custom audiences, what they allow you to do is mirror the demographics or even location and any type of behavior information that your existing audiences have. So say, for example, you have a list of 500 folks. It'll be able to scan and let you know they live in this region. At a high level, this is what their behavior looks like digitally. And what they're able to do is then use that custom audience to model off new audiences for you and suggest other audience reaches that you can find to be able to reach more scale than your initial audience. So it's supremely valuable because of that. But then also those custom audience segments, even within your audience group. So say you have 500, within your 500, you can identify the folks who either are heavy mobile users, folks who are high engagers, folks who attend events or have attended multiple events. I think having the data at your fingerprints is very impactful, but being able to also segment and understand how do you want to speak to a different audience within your larger audience base is also valuable, because you can have almost two different conversations based off of how you segmented them.
So Ramona has a question. Which is what I was wondering. She says, does AdExpresso comply with Facebook's terms and conditions? That was the question I had in terms of the data that people put in at their personal profile. Does it doesn't access that, does it? Or does it?
So it doesn't access what's called your PII. It's your personally identifiable information. So anything that would say you, Nakoa, or me, Matthew Winter, it strips that information. But it basically creates like a code that is representative of us. You know, when you go online and you see like your IP address and all that information, whatever that code is, it's going to create a unique one. But to answer your question, AdExpresso is an API partner for Facebook. And so what Facebook does, because it's an open API, it allows third parties like an AdExpresso to be able to tap into their data without allowing them to tap into the personally identifiable information. So you're able to still target at the profile level down to, you know, everything that's not personally identifiable. So outside of your exact address, outside of your exact phone number, outside of your exact, you know, banking information. But it can create a profile to be able to say, you either have a cluster of folks that have this type of behavior, or user 12345 has done these types of actions.
Okay, so it's behavioral data, not like, oh, these people went to this school or these people are in this. So it's the behavior that it's.
Well, it is both, actually. It takes all of that because it is able to segment folks to say, based off of whatever you put on your profile. So for example, if you list on your profile that you live in Harlem, that you know, you went to a certain school, you work at a certain place, anything that you put in is called first party data. So all of that information is arguably the most helpful, because this is what you're telling Facebook that you are and who you are. And so that information is valuable, but then everything else, the behavioral stuff, is based on the actual actions that you take on the platform. So what you're able to do is kind of marry up the two with anything that's profile data, with anything that's behavioral data. And then platforms like AdExpresso make it really helpful for you to be able to action based off of those.
Wow. Okay, that's really helpful.
So it's kind of create the custom profile that people need for business plans. Exactly. Everyone's custom profile is going to look different based on your business. But yes, that's exactly it. Okay. That custom profile section is who's your ideal target audience. What do they look like? What are the things that they're into? And then you create that profile. And then what AdExpresso or any other API partner does is models it out to be able to identify how many people look like that on the web in terms of their behavioral data or their first party data. But then also it allows you to be able to grow that segment as you learn more about your audiences. So you can add more things or take them out if you realize that something is working or not working. One thing just to note though, just like any of these platforms, they're not all free. So just one thing to keep in mind, there is a freemium version where they're going to give you some kind of light ability to be able to say run one campaign up to a certain amount. But where they have their true value, obviously their business as well, is in the ability to be able to put you on some kind of premium plan. So just keep in mind that AdExpresso is not free, and a lot of these platforms that are the most helpful aren't going to be free. But I would say just start with AdExpresso, and then literally if you type them in on Google, a lot of their competitors are going to come up. So I would encourage you to just give each of them a try out their free trials, see which one works best for you. But just keep in mind that what you're trying to get at is the tactic. AdExpresso is just a medium to do so. So don't feel tied to having to use an AdExpresso versus like a Hootsuite or somebody else who's a competitor of theirs.
Yeah. And just like you mentioned, there is a free trial. So I think it's a month if I'm not mistaken. So you know, you can get some good experience with it to see if it's a long-term fit for you. Okay, so another growth strategy here is to, and it might sometimes just get overlooked, but is to tag your YouTube videos. The more that you're able to tag and add more description to your content, if you know YouTube is something that you're beginning to leverage when it comes to content creation for your brand or for your business, making sure that you tag it gives the ability for it to appear as suggested content. And that way, the discoverability of your content is heightened by your ability to use tags. So we do encourage you, in the event that you do use YouTube and you're at a stage where you're beginning to build content, that you're cognizant of the fact and the importance really of implementing tags. The little effort up front can really provide you with the ability to become more discoverable. And with being more discoverable builds into that awareness element and bucket of growth hacking that allows your business or brand to get out there to more folks. So we do encourage you to use tagging as well. And here's just a kind of a screenshot of how you would just do that. So we do encourage you to check that out as well. And then, something here that I think we briefly discussed as kind of an email campaign idea, but really just surprisingly shows some interesting value is illustrating your progress. A lot of times you want to take your audience with you on your journey. You want to make sure that they're keeping up to date with whatever you have going on, whether it's a product launch, an event, a key mission that you're trying to achieve. So simply being able to illustrate your progress is a great and very creative way on engaging your audience and really building that kind of community that I think really separates more brands that have a higher affinity than ones that have less. So I think, as you're building out your content strategy, as you're thinking of different ways to communicate with your following or your prospects, showing progress really does build that type of community and connection. So when you see there's opportunity, definitely think about being transparent and really looping people into your journey as a creative way to also growth hack, because it's an ability to draw folks in and then give them the opportunity to fall into that kind of conversion bucket. I for one, I like to follow brands that I feel like I've been on the journey with them. And so if I see that they're, embarking upon a milestone or leading into a key event, it's going to entice me to want to participate. So I think it's definitely something that you can try to apply and mix into your content strategy as well.
Just building on what Donnie mentioned, not only what he just said, but if you just think back to everything that we've covered across these now 7.5 sessions, if you would. So we've talked about everything from understanding what organic reach looks like versus paid, understanding not only different hacks and tricks and ways of being able to understand each platform, but then being able to really figure out what are the metrics that matter the most to us. And if you remember, we probably sound like a broken record over these last 7 sessions, because the number one thing that we've been trying to drill home is it's not always about the scale in terms of the numbers, it's about engagement. So everything that we're trying to get on these social platforms in terms of really being able to move the needle for us always comes back to how much engagement can we create, because those organic engagement metrics are really the secret sauce to be able to have success on these platforms. And so even the growth hacks that Donnie just mentioned, those are great platforms and tactics that can help us for free, or in some instances for a freemium, be able to go one step deeper, do something that's a small tweak that could actually have a lot of upside for us. But with that said, there's also the realistic possibility that in addition to all of those things, you still may not necessarily be getting the amount of awareness or scale or engagement that you're looking for. And I know there's a word that we've heard a lot of probably over the last 5 years, but definitely more recently, and that word is influencers. We hear people referred to as influencers. We know people who are influential, and we know that whether you're influential in real life versus in social media capacity, it doesn't necessarily always match up. And so some of the most well-known figures who may even have millions of followers on social media, we call them influencers because there's a lot of people who follow them. But influencer marketing is actually a really impactful solution for brands, both big and small, to be able to tap into in terms of being able to introduce themselves to a new audience, or to be able to get a lot more credibility or recognition from a valuable source. And so what we're going to talk about for the next few slides is actually how do you go about identifying what an influencer, who the right influencer is, what does it look like at a high level. We're really going to kind of cover everything around that, because influencers represent a unique opportunity for us as small businesses, where you may typically think that in order to work with an influencer, it probably requires a lot of money, but you'd be surprised, because as we'll talk about in the subsequent slides, there's some unique ways that a lot of the brands that we may know and love have been working with influencers on a micro, macro level that have really translated to some strong business results for them. And so this is the level of thinking that we want to also introduce to you as an option. This is not by any means the end all be all, and it's something that you should only delve into if you're comfortable, or even something that you could potentially test out. But hopefully, once we have this conversation, you can have a little bit of better of an understanding of what does influencer marketing even mean, and what are some of the ways that you can make it work for you. All right, so moving on to the next slide. Let's start off with just why influencer marketing. So let's just think back to just human psychology. Regardless if we were a business, if a friend or someone that you value their opinion were to refer you to something, you're more than likely going to either make that purchase or take that action, just because that recognition from a reputable source is really something that ultimately ends up being what moves the needle and allows people to actually take an action. And so if we apply that to the business world, when we hear the word influencers, it's applying that exact same concept. Think of influencers as really just people who are influential because of either something they've done, they have a large following, or people just go to them for topical advice on really anything. Influencers come in every single race, every single background, every single region, every single industry. And so when people think of, macro influencers, think of people like a Kim Kardashian. These are folks who have millions and millions of followers, and they're probably in many cases very wealthy or very well known. But for small businesses, getting access to a Kim Kardashian or someone with millions of followers like that, in many instances, is just not a reality. And in addition to not being a reality, if we were able to get that kind of access, it would cost us a lot of money because they understand the value of their platforms. They understand how to monetize them. And so for us, we want to be able to make sure that we're not leaning into the folks who are, we'd be a drop in the bucket if they were to mention us. Though where those macro influencers, and we'll talk a little bit more about the difference, those macro influencers provide you with scale opportunities and just brand mentioning, but there are some downsides to it, which really creates a strong use case for micro influencers, which is where we're going to spend most of our time. And so when you work with micro influencers, small businesses have to rely less on it being about budget, and it's more about being the right brand fit. And so depending on the industry that you're in, whether you're in the consumer packaged goods space, or if you're in the restaurant space or in the fitness space, there's an influencer, a macro and a micro influencer for your industry. And a lot of the folks that you probably follow or view as competitors, a lot of them are either working with influencers or maybe micro influencers themselves. And there's some interesting ways to be able to identify that. And that's what we want to be able to talk to you about, because micro influencers, if nothing else, they're a cost-effective way for you to promote your brand by tapping into the authority that this account or this person has to be able to almost serve as an assist to introduce new audiences or talk about a product that you may be working on. And so moving forward, macro influencers versus micro influencers. So just to give an understanding of what categorizes someone as a micro influencer, think of these folks as also social media figures, but rather than being, say, a celebrity or someone that's deemed an expert or a public figure, these are people who are more so just specialized in a specific category or for a specific product or type of content. And many of us on our Instagram, we follow a relief or, whether it's something political or something social. These are the folks that naturally we either engage with their content more or we flock to their content and are more likely to view through their content because they have a point of view that we respect or are able to get a lot of information from. And so as opposed to a macro influencer who is someone who, in many instances has hundreds and hundreds of thousands of followers, even millions of followers, think of micro influencers as the folks that are, in that 1,000 to maybe even 100,000 range. And I know for us to see 100,000 viewed as micro influencing is probably a little bit odd. But when you think about how many people there are on social media who are just following random accounts, there's a lot of people who are influencers who may only have 5,000 followers or 3,000 followers. But when you look at the type of engagement, which again is our number one thing that we're always looking for, sometimes the folks who have 1,000 followers, 5,000 followers, depending on the industry and what kind of content they put out, sometimes they have way stronger engagement rates than the folks who even have the most reach. And that's where a lot of the opportunity for us comes in, because for a micro influencer versus a macro influencer, on Instagram specifically, there's a huge disparity in terms of the level of engagement that you're going to typically see on a micro influencer's page versus a macro influencer. And just looking at this example, hopefully it's able to see it, but on the left, you have Finding Paola. She's a beauty influencer, and she has 102,000 followers, which is very impressive. She's built a brand for herself. She's built a name for herself. And clearly people flock to her to be able to see who she's wearing, what she's wearing, and be able to get a little bit more information that can hopefully help them make a decision. But as you see, she gets, at least on this post, call it just under 2,000 likes for that post. And she has 102,000 followers. So in terms of her followers, that's a very small engagement rate relative to the amount of people that she can reach. But on the flip side, we're looking at FabDoll23. She is also in the beauty space. She's a beauty blogger, and she only has 16,000 followers. And so in comparison to Finding Paola, obviously her reach capability is much smaller, and there's probably a lot more niche to either regional, since it looks like she's in Texas, but also the type of products that you'll get on her page. If you just look at both of their feeds, as you can see on the left, Finding Paola's is a little bit more about the aesthetic. It's a lot more about the beauty of it and the expression. Whereas on FabDoll23's page, you can see it's very product focused, it's very instructional. And so for that reason, a lot more people probably flock to her to see what products to use, because she's either more than likely going to be providing some kind of tutorial or the real lowdown on it. And as you can see, that has translated into, for her, 5,000 likes on her post, even though she only has 16,000 followers. And not only does she have 5,000 likes, if you look at the comments, which if you remember from our previous sessions is where you actually see some of the strongest engagement come from, or the most valuable engagement in many instances, she has 56 comments on this one post. Whereas, I know you can't see it in this screenshot, but for Finding Paola's page, even though she has 102,000 followers and almost 2,000 likes, she doesn't have anywhere near the amount of engagement. And generally speaking, obviously there's going to be some anomalies, but generally speaking, this is what you see. In many cases, it could be as many 2, 3, 5 times the amount of engagement by working with a micro influencer versus a macro influencer. And so just being able to understand why you may want to choose someone or prioritize a partnership or reaching out to someone who's more of a micro influencer, has a smaller following, this is why. Because as opposed to being able to be a brand that may get mentioned by Finding Paola, she has 102,000 followers, which is amazing. But in many instances, you may not necessarily have the amount of lift that you may be looking for. Whereas if you were to work with someone who's a lot more niche, maybe not as notable as a Finding Paola, but in terms of the actual metrics that are going to be able to do the heavy lifting for you, there's a huge disparity in those engagement rates. Hopefully that makes sense, but to put it into a little bit more perspective, the ways that we typically work with influencers, it can vary. And I won't say that one is either the end all be all or the absolute way that it works, but generally you're going to see someone who's promoting a brand has more than likely either been paid to post that. And what you see on the left is just a general model of what a pay for post type of relationship looks like. The first picture in green is actually just a screenshot from an actual influencer's page where it just gives you a quote to show the amount that they would typically charge based off of their following for a single post. So keep that in mind. This is for one post. Someone with 5 to 10,000 followers, this person is saying can generally charge between $100 and $500 for one post. But someone who has up to 1 million followers can charge $100,000, $10,000, whatever that number is, and they can command that because relative to the amount of reach that they're able to get, they can make a strong use case to be able to say, this is how much a post for me is worth. But something interesting within the pay per post model is that, as you can see in the chart, 84% of micro influencers actually charge less than $250 per Instagram post. And almost 100% of them, 97% of them, charge less than $500. So as a business owner, and especially as a small business owner, being able to be mindful of the return on any investment that we put into our business is important. But I do want to be able to make sure that we understand that if we do go for the pay per post route, it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's an astronomical spend. And if it's something that you do test out, you can be able to identify what that right sweet spot from a spend standpoint that you're willing to pay someone to promote your brand is, knowing that you can either see tons more engagement by working with a micro influencer, and it may also be something that you can build a larger strategy for and be able to identify some efficiencies in. So on one end, that's the pay per post model. But actually where you see a lot more activity happening with micro influencers is actually via ambassador programs. And these actually take place more often than not, and you can see them represented in many of the posts, where, for example, in this, in Mina Nijasel, I hope I pronounced that right, but she is a brand ambassador for this brand called Goldie. And so what you'll normally see with someone who's doing some kind of ambassador program is there'll be a custom hashtag. There'll be something that even says ad, or they'll even explain to you, what they're working, why they're working with this brand, what their partnership looks like. They usually try to be as transparent as possible, but also a key indicator to know if this is an ambassador program is if there's some kind of referral code. So if you see someone say, use my unique code and get 10% off, Fashion Nova or something like that. These are all ambassadors who are being paid by these brands based off of whatever revenue they're able to generate for that brand. And so that could actually be a little bit more cost effective for you, because in many instances, all you're providing is, access to free product or access to an event or unique access for this influencer that they're able to monetize if they're able to generate actual scale and volume for your brand. Because essentially what you're doing is you're doing a revenue share with that person to say, in a hypothetical situation, for every person that you're able to bring in, we'll give you, a 10% kickback or a 20% kickback. And for you, that's financially beneficial because then you have to worry less about the upfront spend and you're actually able to use more of your revenue to be able to pay this person who was able to drive impact for you. And so I'm going to go a little bit more into kind of what this looks like on the next slides, but I did just want to make sure that we have an understanding of kind of the different ways that you can identify a partnership, but also the economics associated with them. Before I go into the next slide, are there any quick questions that I can maybe answer?
Yeah, thank you, Matt. So just one quick question, really good one, is in evaluating influencers, is there a way to find out if any of the influencers are any bots? Is there a way to kind of weed out and identify bots as you're trying to go through evaluating different influencers and partners?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And if you were here for one of the previous sessions, we had a lot of conversation around bots and why someone may be using them, but also why they could be hurtful for businesses. And so a lot of the ways to be able to identify a bot, to be honest, is going to take a little bit more of a kind of a Q&A on your end to be able to look into the post, to be able to identify, is this a real person? Look at the type of content they post, look at the way that they respond in comments. Comments actually represents the ways that you could identify a bot pretty quickly. If a comment seems very spammy, if it's like, nice post, check out our brand, or if it seems like something that has no personalization whatsoever to that page, it's more than likely going to be a bot that's commenting. However, for someone who is an influencer, if you look at their actual page, look at the amount of followers that they have versus the type of content that they post. In rare instances, will those be bots? Generally, bots are going to be identified based off of the way they're engaging versus what they're actually posting. But my advice to you would be to really kind of do your due diligence. And on the subsequent slides, without getting too far into it, a hugely important piece of working with any kind of influencer is to be able to think about how this person, who is essentially a brand themselves, are they, one, the right fit for your brand? Two, are they a brand that you want to be associated with as well? But then three, look at the way that they communicate about any partnership or in the content that they're creating. Because if it's not consistent with the way that you would want your brand represented, or if it feels a little scammy where it potentially could be a bot, I would caution you to actually potentially stay away from them, because there's a lot of high value influencers out there that you can, with a little bit more digging and a little bit more scouring and evaluating, you can identify a more meaningful partnership versus potentially someone who could in some weird world be a bot. So I hope that answers the question. Any other questions before I jump ahead?
And then lastly, just in terms of ambassador programs like what we have here on the screen and pay for post, is there a resource that can be tapped into to ensure that whatever arrangement that you structure with a potential partner meets any kind of regulations or standards when it comes to like FTC for the Federal Trade Commission, things like that?
That's an interesting question. Unfortunately, I don't think that influencer marketing is necessarily there where the requirements for someone who's working as an influencer is regulated. You can be 100% sure that you know they're not get into on one of the later slides in terms of how you build that partnership, what it looks like, being able to structure that partnership in a way that in many instances you have the leverage because you're able to say, I'm willing to either pay you this amount to be able to partner with me. And so with that, these are the terms that I'm setting out of what your post needs to look like, what it needs to say. And because you have at least some kind of control in terms of what the partnership looks like, you can also set the parameters that based off of your specific industry are things and guardrails that you want to make sure that they adhere to. Because the last thing that you want, which I think is where you're leading towards, is that you work with someone who could potentially put your business in harm based off of something that they say or do when they're representing your brand. And so in short, I don't think that there's any kind of like mandate, but I would say that that's something that depending on who you're potentially thinking of partnering with, you do have a conversation so that there's transparency in terms of what they can and can't say as well.
Yeah, and maybe just to tackle on NFL, it's an experience. These are experiences we've had personally as well in partnerships, maybe not necessarily speaking to influencers, but just partnerships in general. Always try to consult a legal partner as well for any questions. I know when there's typically gray area for us when it comes to how we might arrange or be protected against any regulation, we typically tap into a few legal contacts that we have just to make sure that we're doing things in the right manner. So I do suggest that in these areas where it does feel a little gray and you want to establish some level of protection, and also make sure that the arrangements that you're conducting are in a certain standard. Open source resource can only take you so far for some certain cases. It can give you an indication to where there might be a red flag, but I would definitely suggest anything that relates to partnership arrangements, agreements, contracts. I would definitely say consult someone with a legal background for sure to start. Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing I did forget to mention that any ambassador program, any influencer partnership always has to have, what you can kind of see here, paid partnership with X brand. All influencers, probably going back to the FTC, if I were to do some digging, part of kind of the fair trade and fair play rules on the platforms, is that they do need to indicate that it is a paid partnership. So it can't be inferred that something is organic when it's actually paid. So in many instances, whether it's a hashtag or whether it's actually using that branded partnership tool, which is actually within the platform, these influencers do have to let their followers know that this is an ad or they have been paid in some capacity. And so anyone that you do potentially work with, also make sure that they're doing that, because that will also keep you clear of any potential regulation issues in the event that you don't. So again, I'll kind of skim through these because I know we did talk about them a little bit, but just some ways that micro influencers can help small businesses is that they can help us find and reach a target market in a much more effective way than we would organically. So if you can identify an influencer whose audience naturally aligns with who your target audience is, whether there's some overlap of the people who are already following yours, who are following theirs, or if it's an audience that is valuable to you that you want to be able to make an impact with, this is an area where an influencer could potentially be the way to go, because they can be that assist that can help you get to that sale. But also, as I mentioned before, micro influencers have extremely active followers and really high engagement rates. And so for small businesses, a lot of the success comes in the engagement. And so being able to have deeper conversations and lead to more engagement within posts and with your brand. This is where for small businesses, it can really be a difference maker versus, if you were a larger brand. But finally, one of the more important things is that with micro influencers, this is an opportunity to humanize your brand. which is something that doesn't necessarily always happen. But for us as small business owners, it's a unique opportunity for us to have someone speak about their experience with our brand, speak about what they can expect from a certain brand, or just why you should consider working with that brand. It gives it that personal feel where in many instances, because we are a brand, there's some natural distrust where people are always going to think that a brand speaking of themselves is always going to be more favorable. But if you do get that cosign from someone who's able to at least humanize it a little bit more, micro influencers is a great way for you to be able to go about doing so. So next, we're going to just go into some tactical ways of being able to actually find the right micro influencer for your brand. And so again, these are high level tactics. It is going to vary based on your industry, the type of product, but also your potential budget of how much you are willing to spend to work with a micro influencer. So the first thing to do is we would encourage you to actually start with your own social media following list. Identify the people who are following your brand, maybe even the folks who are actively engaging with your brand, but look into your follower list to see who are the folks that have, say, 1,000 to 10,000 followers, because these are people who are more than likely naturally going to be interested in your brand because they've already taken the step to be following you. And so once you identify these folks, look into their profiles. This is where I said really do the due diligence to find out, what they post. Who do they post about? Do they work with businesses typically? If they do, what are the type of businesses they do? And an example that I have here is, if you're a local restaurant, look for micro influencers who are either local to you or post about the type of food that you actually are creating. Because many instances, their followers are going to be used to seeing them post in that way. And it is in many instances going to be organic, but you want to be able to make sure that you're identifying someone who, if you were to work with them in this way, it wouldn't seem a bit off for them to be posting about your brand, whether it's something that is clearly an ad or just in a more organic way, because we want to be able to have the most organic approach as possible. The third step is check their engagement rates. So this is something that we spoke about at length earlier in the session, but just in terms of the actual calculation of being able to get that, it is a bit of math. So if you're like me and you're not necessarily a math whiz, this kind of breaks down how you go about getting to that equation. And again, it is you take the number of likes and comments that they get on their posts versus the amount of followers that they have. And then when you multiply that number by 100, it's going to give you a percentage. And so, as I said, for a micro influencer, you can see, on average, say 3% being great. But there are some influencers out there who are giving you, 2 to 3% on average. And anyone who can get you, or you're seeing, with 4 to 6%, that is really exceptional, because the higher that number goes, the closer you are to what we call that virality. And obviously everyone thinks they want to go viral. And we talked about in earlier sessions why virality shouldn't necessarily be the strategy. You want to be able to drive engagement, and that can actually lead to more virality as well for you. And so once you do that, there's nothing more for you to do but to reach out. So reaching out is probably the most anxiety-driven part, because I know for us, in many instances, you're either cold emailing someone, cold DMing someone to just have a conversation. And in many instances, it could be a 50-50 chance if they're going to even respond. Sometimes people are either too busy to either check their DMs or even notice a DM. And then on the other end, there's going to be folks who just typically don't engage with folks in that capacity. And so I would say, if you are going to reach out, just be prepared to know that some folks, even if you do have a conversation with them, may turn down your offer because influencers in some instances are either super packed in terms of their bandwidth, or sometimes they're very protective of the brands that they work with because it may not necessarily align with their overall brand. And also something to keep in mind is that many of these large influencers, whether they're big or small, they many times are managed by actual agencies or have a manager. And so just know that if this person is telling you that they have a manager, or says if you want to reach out to talk about a partnership, to reach out to this number or this form of communication, just know that it is going to be a negotiation. And so one thing you want to make sure that you're coming into any conversation with them with is understanding of what are the terms that are favorable for you. What's the most that you're willing to pay for something? What is the timing that works for you? Because as I mentioned earlier, while yes, to a degree you do need them, they're still patroning your business the same way that you're theirs. And so you want to be able to make sure that there's a lot of reciprocity there, and it's not just terms that are being dictated by them that could be potentially unfavorable for you. All right, and so here's some tips for just how to reach out to micro influencers. So the first thing, as I mentioned, is research the actual page themselves. Try to find what the best form of communication for them is. So as you can see here, this person lets you know right on their profile, which many of them do. If you're ever interested in reaching out to them, to email them. All of these Instagram profiles now have the ability to have an email button directly there that can take you directly to the app. But if this person is telling you that email is the way to go, I would encourage you to go with email and not DM them, because this person is already letting you know their preferred means. And so if you go outside of that, it's going to decrease the likelihood that they're going to be open to working with you. With that said, some of them also may not necessarily have the contact form within their actual profile. And some of them may use their website or their blog as a means of being able to reach out to them. And so I would say in your research, identify whether one or multiple ways of getting in contact with this person to be able to figure out what the best way of reaching them is. Some of them have a work with me section or a contact section. This is a great way for you to kind of do that initial outreach, but also just keep in mind that some people may be slow as well to respond. And so it doesn't hurt to follow up, but just be mindful and professional in terms of giving them a little bit more time to be able to get back to you in the event they don't respond quickly. Also, the second tip is that email is actually the best form of making that first point of contact. If you can find that person's email, we would encourage you to actually do that first as opposed to DMing them, even though you may be tempted to just go to DM because you're already on social media. Excuse me, but for the reasons that I mentioned before, a DM may not necessarily be the most favorable thing because folks aren't always checking their DM. But if this person is a professional and is a micro influencer, they're more than likely going to be checking their emails for these type of outreaches if they've already put it on their profile and let people know that they can reach out to them. But email is great because it allows you to give a lot more depth to the conversation as opposed to a general DM, which may just be something quick where the person may be turned off by just seeing the length of a message, where you want to be able to get everything in it of what you're needing and you're looking to work with them on. And an email will provide you that opportunity to really be able to break it out, segment it, and have it be as clear and concise as possible. And when you're reaching out, be sure to make it feel personal. Be sure to introduce yourself, introduce your role, if it's your brand or you're working with the brand, and let them know more about the brand. What are some of the reasons why, your brand is a great fit for them, but also let them know why you're reaching out to them. What are some of the ways that, what was something about their brand that enticed you to want to reach out to them, and some of the natural overlap. The more personal it feels, the more reciprocal the conversation potentially feels, the more likely you are to have some success with it. So I would definitely encourage you to make sure that it feels personal, but also make sure that it doesn't feel like something that's copy and pasted as well. Because if you are going to be reaching out to multiple folks, which we highly encourage you to do so, there's nothing worse, as I'm sure we all know, than getting kind of a canned message where it doesn't feel like it's for you. It feels like just a general message. And so what we just have here is just some sample language that you can feel free to use or tweak based off of your business and your outreach plan. But as you can see here, what we've included here is, if you're a fashion brand, you introduce yourself, you talk about what you're looking to do, but then also letting them know, what it is that entices you about their brand and what is it that you potentially want to do with them. And then moving forward, the most important thing that we're going to leave you with is, regardless of kind of how you structure that partnership, make sure that you are as specific as possible. That gray area and that ambiguity is is an instance that could potentially leave you open to be taken advantage of, or to pay more than you're willing to, or potentially be underwhelmed in terms of the delivery of what they're going to be providing. And so before reaching out, I would encourage you to have a very clear outline of what you're looking for in that campaign. What are the metrics that matter to you? And also have an understanding and a clear directive of how much you're willing to pay. So for example, if you know that you want this person to post to IG stories because you know that that's where your following engages the most, be very specific about that, but also be open to asking them, what are some of the tactics that they typically use when they're working with an influencer, or excuse me, with a brand? Because there's going to be some overlap potentially, but there's also the opportunity for you to be able to get additional exposure in a way that you may not have been interested in or known could be effective before. So hopefully all of that is helpful, but did want to also mention some other tools very similar to AdEspresso that we mentioned earlier. These are some management tools that actually can help you in the research for finding these influencers. So think about this as a platform that you can input some of the requirements of what you're looking for, and they can actually spit out to you regionally or endemically who are some of the influencers that you should consider. And in many instances, they can actually work with you on the outreach. But I would also want to add that similar to AdEspresso, that is probably where the premium is going to come in. And so just be mindful of that before you do any outreach as well. And so I know we threw a lot at you. We want to be able to make sure we have some time for some Q&A. So I'm not sure if the chat was going off, but did want to just open it up for any questions that anyone on the call may have.
I want to ask a question, Matthew and Donald. What do y'all think about the Clubhouse? And you know, it's so much influence stuff being pushed. You know, I have 100,000 followers, and sometimes it seems like a bunch of crap. Like they sharking to find people. Clubhouse used to be great.
Yep.
It still is great, but I see that they prey on a lot of these young people who are looking to get into the music industry, the young people just hungry. And not only young, but mainly young, but a lot of people are hungry and just looking for somebody to do something for them instead of building their own, trying to build their own brand.
Yeah.
No, Maria, I think you hit it on the head. I think Clubhouse, with a lot of things like a platform like that, it has a lot of opportunity there. And because there's, almost endless opportunity, there are going to be folks who have been able to figure out, how can I gamify this to make it favorable for me? And so there are going to be a lot of folks on there who are either not as influential as they may make themselves seem. And especially because it's just an audio platform, it's a little bit easier for someone to be able to talk a good game on a platform like Clubhouse, and be able to position themselves to be a little bit more favorable than they probably are. That's not to say that there's not value in Clubhouse, and definitely don't want you to take me wrong there. But I would say approach Clubhouse in the way that use it as, something that's within your mix versus something that you're doubling down on to really be able to drive success for you. It's a great networking opportunity. And a lot of what it does is that it allows you to meet folks that in many instances you wouldn't have been able to meet, or that you could potentially have a much more direct conversation with. But I would also take many of the conversations that happen on Clubhouse with a grain of salt and be able to understand, where is it that the truth is, and where is it that this could potentially open me up based off of who this person is, where they may potentially take advantage of me. Because I have seen a model where folks may introduce themselves on Clubhouse, and then they'll say, I'm running a cohort right now that if you pay me $500, I'm going to be able to work with you on this product. And not to say that, that's not the case and that it's inauthentic, but I do caution that you want to be able to do your research and your due diligence to understand who are some of the people that seem real and who are the folks that are maybe just blowing steam out.
Yeah, no, I agree there. Now, Matthew, that was a really good point. I think my take on Clubhouse is very similar. I would say, I would see it as as an extension of kind of things that you're looking to accomplish or build, right? So I do see it as a viable platform. If you were, and especially in a virtual space and world that we are in now, if you were interested in facilitating Q&As or kind of talking sessions, things like that, the platform can be very useful to facilitate and have those type of conversations. I think the platform is also good to market, to hop into different conversations, see if there's information that you
So,
can grab. But I would caution, given
Brad,
that
he-
it's expanded so much, there is a lot of,
hello,
hello? Yeah, I would say there is a lot of gamifying that's happening. So I would be able to, I would definitely caution that, but look for ways you can leverage it for your personal brand and ways in which you can maybe hold conversations, use it as a platform to establish some kind of reoccurring cadence, things like that, I think is really good for. But yeah, I would be very careful about when identifying influencers through that platform.
And I want to ask y'all, what makes a person an influencer? Because they just throwing this word all around all of a sudden. Before Clubhouse,
Yep.
I never heard of an influencer. Now people like, I'm an influencer. I'm an influencer.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, the word influencer, it's a double-edged sword because someone could potentially be influential where they're just using the fact that they have a lot of people who follow their social page to be able to use that as a proxy to say, I'm an expert on something. But that's not always the case. And going back to the example that we gave early in the presentation, someone who's influential, I would argue that someone is influential if they're able to get someone to take an action and we're able to have meaningful conversation with them versus them just having a large fan base. Because, I follow Drake on social media and he's influential because he's Drake. But if Drake tells me to go to this restaurant, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to do it because I don't have any type of personal tie or any personal value associated with my day-to-day life that I think Drake would be able to potentially provide me with insight into. However, on the flip side, if everyone's calling themselves an influencer, that also means that there are folks who really are only having influential numbers and aren't actually able to drive an action or be seen as someone who has meaningful input on a topic. And so just be cautious of who calls themselves an influencer. I would say with anything, always do your research because numbers don't lie. Even though someone has a big following, sometimes the engagement numbers are really going to tell you who's the influential person versus someone who is just able to either use bots or just able to get a big following because of maybe one post that went viral. But in terms of how they've used that influence, it's still left up to discussion.
Thank you, y'all. Oh, thank you. That was great.
No problem.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
And not only just on this topic, I know this is the last session, so we want to be able to make sure that if there was anything that was covered across, the last 8 sessions, this is an opportunity that we can have a quick conversation on it. Obviously, we're open to having conversations separately, but if there's anything that has been covered or something that is just a burning question that you have that you want to chat about, now would be a great opportunity to do so because we've heard a lot of great best practices. We've heard a lot of great case studies of people applying a lot of the tactical knowledge that we've provided. But we also want to make sure that at the core of this, it's always going to come back to making sure that you have meaningful insight into something before you take that action. And we want to be able to make sure that we can explain anything that we've talked about so that you feel confident before you do anything that we've talked about.
Are y'all gonna be doing this again? Because I need y'all to do this again. Because this is taking all this in, but it's good. I'm a newbie, but this is like been.
It's a great segue.
Yeah, it is actually, Maria. So the answer to your question is yes. This has been a lot of information. We've picked up a lot of people along the way, along the 16 weeks, people that didn't start out with as the word got out and people joined, and folks have been trying to go and watch the YouTube videos. But to your point, it is helpful to do the sessions with Donald and Matthew and with the group to really be able to ask questions and take it in a little differently than when you're watching it on your own. So we're going to do the program again in September for anyone that feels like they want to kind of get that additional touch point, yes. And then for those that, didn't get to do it this time, I've gotten so many emails from people about the class. And so as much as you can spread the word, and of course, tag Harlem Park to Park when you talk about the fact that you've completed this course and how beneficial it was. We want to make sure all entrepreneurs, all of our small businesses in Harlem are as equipped as possible to win. And we all know that this is a big part of marketing, of business development. It's not even just about social media anymore. This is this is strategic growth, right? For your business.
Yeah.
And there's so many aspects of social media that are more than just the photos that you post. As we've learned, the analytics allow you to develop strategies for new product, new audience. I mean, there's so many things that we've learned, and we want to make sure that everyone's got these tools. So yes, we'll run this program again in the fall. What we also want to get from you is what are some other areas that you want this same level of comprehensive education? What curriculum would you like to see? Is there another area of business that you feel like you want to deep dive? Because that's really going forward now for us with Park to Park, is about providing deep dive. We've seen the success with this. And now we see kind of the broad stroke cursory 2-hour workshop that gives you 800 things to remember. This is not effective. So I love the fact that someone called, I think it was Angel from Maison 276, said this was a masterclass in digital marketing strategy. That's really where we need to be. And even if you have to take the class twice, so what? That, you're going to master it however long it takes you, but the information and the content is what's important. So I'd love to hear from some of you. I mean, the guys, maybe you want to give a quick overview of, is it Cubed? What's the name of the business that's like your umbrella business and all of the different services, financial, so that they know the subject matter that we can craft curriculum around. So why don't you do that pitch right now?
Oh, of course. Thank you, Nicola. And
Mhm.
Matthew, you'll feel free to chime in as well. So, thank you for the introduction. So Cubed is a concept that we're working on as T10 to bring to the Harlem community and just the small business community at large, where we're really looking to establish a more systematic way to provide all the services and support that's needed for a small business. So the focus is really on identifying what those pain points and challenges are. And what we've realized over our experience in working within the community is that a lot of it comes around, training, networking, actual service. So the services of marketing, the services of strategy and analytics, finance as well. And then also access to capital. So what we're looking to do in this concept is really build a platform and a product that can help address all of the needs that a small business faces. That way we create not only a community, but an ecosystem that you can tap into so that our small businesses can be propelled to the next level. And that's kind of our mission and what we're based in as an organization. And Cubed is a way in which we're looking to expand upon this even further. So we're going to definitely provide you with some more information about this in the coming weeks. And so look out for some communication from us. And if you have any interest in learning more about it, feel free to reach out to us via our social channels or via email. I know the materials will have our contact information in it that we'll send. But yeah, in a nutshell, that's what we're looking to do: a platform and an online community that addresses all the core needs of a small business. And we love for everyone here to be a part of it as we build it out. And hopefully we can help serve you and help you achieve your goals. Because that's truly our core mission as an organization.
Not only in large part to the success that we've seen and the great feedback that we've gotten from this, where we do realize that there's a need for this at scale. In addition to being able to have these workshops on a bi-weekly basis, it's clear that not only within the local community, but the small business community at large does need to be able to not only have access to these types of conversations, but also potentially access to people who can help them do that. And so a lot of what we're working on is to be able to help you in that regard. And we'll be able to provide some more details as we kind of grow that out moving forward.
For sure. And I know we have a few things in the chat. I don't want to let them go without missing them. So I see a few questions. One was around tying back into email marketing. And the question was about, do you find that casual customers are more annoyed by email marketing and that your ride or die customers are actually are looking forward to it? I would say it's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag. Definitely your recurring customers are going to have more affinity for your email marketing communication. But I think it all ties back into some of the strategies we touched on. So one was being transparent with how often they should expect an email from you, how you actually, how they were subscribed. All of those things kind of matter, because if the email comes off very in a more, I guess, solicitation manner, or even more or scammy, it can be turned off. But if you're able to create a communication and marketing scheme within your emails that is built on transparency, on using those lead magnets, so a simple information or survey that exchanges something in return for subscribing, it starts your connection and your relationship with that new email subscriber in a different manner than by you just simply cold emailing them. So I do encourage you to use certain tactics like lead magnets, sign up forms as ways to say, hey, fill out this survey and in return discount. That kind of way builds the relationship in a more transparent and authentic manner, that then as they as they are a life cycle customer with you, you can build further communication with them with other tactics that you leverage. So I think from an email marketing perspective, I think that's a great way to approach it. Just scheming through some of the other ones here. We see, another part of the community here mentioned that they're someone new to entrepreneurship within the fitness space, and they're looking to explore the different marketing tools. How should I how should I employ them in a certain part of your business? I think using social from day one, right, I think is a great strategy. I think Matthew already mentioned the chat, starting with Instagram and Facebook, I think is a great way to start. Doing your due diligence, tapping into some of the content we covered in this session. So whether through the emails or online or via YouTube can create a great starting point too, because we kind of started with organic social media and got all the way here to influencer. So it's a great kind of playbook for you to look at. But yeah, I would say starting from day one, speaking through your journey, communicating and building that connection online, I think is very recommended as you start out. But I don't know, Matt, if you had anything to add there as well.
Yeah, I was actually just finishing my response in the chat, but what I'll do is I'll just vocalize it.
Okay.
I think exactly what you just said. And I would also say, Tangi, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But in addition to, just testing things out, not being scared to test, learn, and optimize based on that. I think if there's one takeaway, I would say that's the main thing. Don't feel that because you've been in business a certain amount of time, a year, 5 years, less, that you need to be at a certain point relative to another business, because it is going to be very individualistic. It is going to be based off of your individual brand and the steps that you are taking or not taking. So with that said, I would definitely encourage you, like Donald said, start using Facebook and Instagram, because those are the two platforms that have the most overall usage. And so you'll get the most opportunity. But also I would encourage you to go back to the session on Google Analytics, because that's a great session that was able to help identify some of the ways that you can use some of the data of what you already have to inform some of your decisions on social or any of your other platforms. But more than anything, be mindful of it being a marathon and not a sprint.
Yeah.
Sure, it's great to be able to have like a great week or a great month or a great year and really kind of kick ass in that capacity. But a lot of the brands that have been able to really have some success with social media have been the ones that have chipped away with it over time. And so even what we covered off on today with influencer marketing, that's something that to a degree is a little bit more advanced. I wouldn't even call it advanced level, but it is something that builds on a lot of the early things that you're doing, that once you're able to build some kind of momentum, with optimizing your copy or optimizing your creative, then being able to identify, okay, maybe now is the point that I should test out working with someone in a partnerships capacity, whether, I pay them to do a post or I work with them in an affiliate capacity. I would say also look into what your competitors and other people who you would say are crushing it in your industry are doing, because there's a lot of things that you can take from their approach to apply to your business and just optimize as you go. hopefully that answered your question. And then there was one more question in the chat. As we do more social media, we should more care about the virus, the hacker persona, which security software do you use? So unfortunately, wouldn't be able to give you any recommendations on security software. I think that it is going to vary, to be honest. But on social media specifically, you don't have to worry about, because bots and random people that reach out to you in your DMs, that's what leaves you open and susceptible to that type of thing. And so there aren't any platforms that we can say you definitely should use, but would encourage you to say, just be mindful of any interaction that you have with a person or brand, because people aren't always who they say they are. And it is easier once you're on social media to be open to that.
Anyway, so I think, I mean, that's all I have to say. If there's nothing else, we can conclude and thank everyone for just, you know, this has been a great experience. I think we built a community around it. So we will look to continue building on that.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining. And thanks, Nicole and Morgan.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. You're welcome.
Everyone.